on Friday, a group of us from Sandy Springs Christian Church played in the second annual Craddock Center Golf Tournament up at White Path Golf Course, a beautiful setting in the mountains of Ellijay, Georgia. Now, for those of you who know them, I happen to be paired in a group with Jeff Matthews and Gary Peterson and Alan McCarron. At one point, we were walking off a green where we noticed a family of deer in the woods beside us. As we crossed over to the next tee box, the deer followed us and they made their way through the woods that ran adjacent to the hole we were about to play. Gary went over to the woods, got as close as he could to them without scaring them away, watching them intently. He said to us, "Aren't they amazing? So majestic. I mean, I just see beauty, don't you?" Meanwhile, Alan's on the tee box getting ready to tee off when he responds, "I don't know, I just see dinner." I got his permission to share that story this morning. I was reminded in that moment, of course, that we all see things a bit differently, although I suppose it should not have come as any surprise. After all, one's vantage point always makes for a different perspective. Recently, there was a video circulating on social media that was claiming to show Muslims in New York rallying for Sharia law. A closer look, however, revealed that it was in fact Muslims at a United Against Islamophobia rally in New York, held in solidarity with the Muslims attacked in New Zealand recently. You see, sometimes one's perspective causes us to see only what we want to see. On the other hand, sometimes our vantage point can also blind us as well. I've been worried about that as it relates to the shootings that continue to take place in schools and religious buildings in our country. Take the two most recent at the synagogue in Poway, California, or on the campus of the University of North Carolina recently. Don't get me wrong, it's not that they go unnoticed. It's just that they're so common anymore, so very much embedded in our culture. I wonder if we even look at the faces of the victims and their families these days, let alone see gun violence as a systemic problem in our country with very real potential solutions. I'm not sure what Jesus' followers see when the risen Christ joins them on the road to Emmaus in our reading this morning, although they must have noticed him, even if they thought he was a stranger. Luke doesn't tell us exactly what they see. Instead, he writes, as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up with them and walked alongside them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Which makes a difference, doesn't it? I mean, it's one thing to be seen, but it's another to be recognized. At least that's my experience. I'll be at the grocery store or at a restaurant or outside at some local event, and I'll notice one of you. I'll walk up and I'll say, "Hey, it's me." It always takes a second before that moment of recognition. In fact, it happens so often I can predict what you will say. "Oh, hey Nathan, I didn't recognize you without your robe on." Don't worry though, when I see you out doing something you're not supposed to be doing, I never recognize you. Being seen and being recognized. There is a difference. It's the difference between being noticed and being known. It's the difference between being anonymous and being understood. Even between going to a megachurch and going to a church like ours. That's what Dale thought, anyway. He was a congregant of the church I served during my first year of divinity school. I preached there weekly, providing pulpit supply while they were searching for a minister. It was a great opportunity for me to practice and to give them a sense of purpose, helping nurture a young seminary student into ministry. And Dale was there every Sunday. He never missed. Rain, sleet, snow, or shine, I knew I could count on Dale to show up. At the end of my ministry, in fact, the church held a reception in my honor, and I remember talking with Dale over cake and punch about how impressed I was with his perfect attendance. I said to him, "But I gotta ask, don't you need a break every now and again?" I mean, I certainly would from my preaching. He responded, Well, I would have liked one, but I just couldn't risk it. Whenever I used to miss worship with the last preacher, the next morning he'd show up on my doorstep asking me where I was. He's right, of course. There's something risky about being recognized. It requires a kind of vulnerability of sorts, which I can't help but wonder is the reason Jesus' followers were at first kept from recognizing him. After all, there was plenty that could have gone wrong, or at least that had certainly been the case for Jesus in the preceding days. Sometimes it's just easier to remain anonymous. I was listening to an interview recently of Brooks Koepka, who's a well-known professional golfer, although if you're not an avid golfer, you might not even know who he is. He's won 3 major championships in the last couple of years, had a ton of success both on and off the golf course, and yet he's still not very well known. In fact, when he was asked what the best thing is about being Brooks Koepka, he said almost immediately, "No one recognizes me." He went on, Tiger, Phil, Dustin, Ricky, those guys can't go out of the house without being recognized. They're bothered everywhere they go, but I can sit at the same table with them, and no one knows who I am. It's fantastic. Perhaps this seems obvious for a celebrity, but I can't help but wonder if the same is true for you and me. I mean, it's one thing to post pictures of ourselves on social media, or tell stories about our lives at a dinner party, or even have those regular drinking buddies. But it's another to be vulnerable enough for people to not just see images of our lives, but to become part of them. It's something different to tell stories about ourselves than to allow people to share in those stories with us. It's just a lot easier to have those surface-level relationships than it is to have real friends. It's just a risky thing to be recognized. In fact, I was reminded of this yesterday at a gathering I went to, First Christian Church in Decatur, First Christian Church of Atlanta, Ray of Hope Christian Church, and folks from Sandy Springs Christian Church. We all sent representatives to an event at the National Institute for Civil Rights downtown. We were to tour the museum together, to gather for lunch and conversation afterward. It was aimed at our continuing conversation among our churches and our denomination with regard to being a pro-reconciling, anti-racism church. I'd never been to the museum before, but I knew or had a good sense about what I would see. The story of one group of people hating another group of people because of the color of their skin. However, and perhaps because it was the subject matter of my sermon this week, something different about the civil rights movement did strike me. That not only were African Americans in this country risking their lives for their constitutional rights to be seen as equal, they were risking their lives to being recognized as being fully human. Sometimes risking recognition is actually a matter of life and death. It certainly was for Jesus just 3 days earlier. Now Jesus is risking something different. Will they run away scared in silence? Will they not believe that it's me? Will all of it be for naught? And yet, despite these concerns and the breaking of bread, he reveals himself, wounds and all. And they not only recognize him, but believe his story to be true and go on to share that story with others. Which I can't help but wonder is the real message of this story too. Not just that we recognize others, but that we become vulnerable enough to truly be recognized ourselves, wounds and all. Can it be that something as simple as truly revealing ourselves to one another has the power to save the world? After all, while it may not be what we always want, it's certainly what we need. It's what a hungry infant needs when she cries for someone to hold her and feed her. It's what a tired 4-year-old needs when he throws a fit in the middle of the mall. It's what a depressed teenager needs when they drink themselves into a blackout every weekend. It's what a caregiver needs whose loved one is dying from Alzheimer's. It's what a lonely adult needs when they spend more time online searching for something, for anything else than recognizing what they already have. Because you see, being recognized, it's a powerful thing. To know that another human being has truly understood you and received you for who you really are, beyond your history, beyond the latest news, beyond the narrative others tell about your life, or even that you share about yourself, to be recognized like Jesus recognized others and himself is recognized in this story, that kind of being recognized, well, it's more than powerful. It's pure grace. Or at least that's the way Stuart described it to Marion, my wife, this last week at a conference she was attending. And not just to her, but to more than 100 different mission pastors in the United Methodist Church attending, where he shared his story. You see, being recognized for Stuart was a real practical risk. Stuart was an extreme germaphobe. So you can imagine he wasn't content, rarely even to be seen, let alone recognized. So when his church called him about a prison ministry, it was no surprise he politely declined. The person asking, though, was not easily discouraged. He said, "Stuart, I picked you because you never have to actually see an inmate. You mentor from a distance, talking to them on the phone once a week for 6 months prior to their release, then once a week for 6 months after their release." "Oh, that's it?" "Yeah, that's it. I think I can do that." And so Stuart began his mentorship with Ryan. And each week they spoke on the phone. Every once in a while, Ryan would need a few extra bucks for his food account, but never more than 20. That was all there was to it. One phone call a week, talking to Ryan on the phone, never really sharing anything personal about himself and providing a few bucks here and there. Until one day, a couple of months before Ryan's release, Stuart got a phone call out of the blue. Ryan said, "Stuart, my mom's been diagnosed with terminal cancer. The judge has agreed for her to make a special private visit to me to share with what might be our last meal together. There's just one catch. My mentor has to accompany me. That's you." Immediately, Stuart began to sweat. He wasn't equipped for this. And then again, how could he say no? And so a couple of weeks later, he was picking up Ryan's mom along with a bag of lukewarm barbecue and headed to the prison. When they arrived in the room in which they were to meet Ryan, his mother began to pull the barbecue out of the bag. Of course, she couldn't bring any plastic utensils in, as they could have been used as weapons. So she began to use her bare hands to break down this brisket, tear apart these ribs. You can imagine what that was like for Stuart. But then Ryan entered the room. He didn't look like the picture that Stuart had received, but Stuart nevertheless recognized him. Ryan embraced his mother and then Stuart. The three of them sat down and began to eat. This was apparently Ryan's favorite barbecue, so at first he didn't say much. But finally, with barbecue all over his face and his fingers, Ryan looked at Stuart and he said, "You know, I thought God had given up on me. I thought life, as I knew it, was over. But in this moment, I recognize Jesus never left. He's been with me in you, Stuart, every step of the way." Stuart said, "At first I thought it was acid reflux. It was the spiciest barbecue I'd ever had. But then I recognized it was a different kind of heartburn. The same kind experienced by Jesus' followers some 2,000 years ago, while eating after a long day's journey to a village called Emmaus.